This year, the 270 Winchester cartridge is 100 years old. So this is what I'm going to talk about. Now, my very first experience with the 270 Winchester was in the early part of the 70s. I worked with an old fella, an old machinist. I was a machinist, working in a machine shop, worked together. I learned an awful lot from this particular old machinist who'd been doing it all of his life. And he told me one day that he had a 270 rifle that he'd like to sell. And I asked him what it was, and he told me that it was a 270 Husqvarna. He'd had it since it was brand new, quite a few years. He'd hunted with it. He probably only shot about 1.5 boxes of ammunition through this rifle at the time. And he brought it to the shop, and I looked it over and asked him what he wanted for it, and he told me, and I bought it from him. Now, this is a lightweight Husqvarna rifle, 270. If I remember correctly, the barrel was like 21 5/8 inches long is what they were. I worked up a load for this rifle with 150 grain Mauser partitions. Of course, this is the old style lathe turn Mauser partitions. And this rifle would shoot sub 3/4 minute angle groups with my loads. I hunted with it. It was handy to carry. I killed an elk at about 325 yards with it with one shot. I killed a buck deer at a guesstimated 575 yards with that rifle. And I realized very early on that the 270 Winchester did a very good job of killing game. And over the years, I decided that I would build myself another 270 Winchester. And I'll show you this rifle. I built this rifle in the early 80s. This is a 1909 Argentine Mauser action that I remodeled, put a 2-position safety, different bolt handle on it, checkered it myself, made this stock from the blank. It's got a cartridge trap in the butt, 3 cartridges in the butt, 3 cartridges in the magazine. You're pretty well set. What all you might happen to need to do. This is my preferred stock style, and I hand checkered this with a wrap-around checkering pattern on the grip and on the forend. This is a very beautiful piece of Claro walnut. This is a 2nd series Bausch Lomb 2.5 to 8 variable power scope. I bought this scope in 1966, and they were $65. Now, this is a very high quality scope. This is an example of optics, what we once had. Premier optics, what we had at one time. And I have another rifle here with the 1st series Bausch Lomb 2.5 to 8 on it. And I'll show you that rifle. This is built on an FN Mauser action. This has also got a Bausch Lomb 2.5 date on it. This is the first series Bausch Lomb scopes. And both of these rifles, by the way, have a Beuhler microdot mount. These scopes did not have internal adjustments. You had to have an external adjustable mount. And this is an outstanding mount. It works excellently. There's nothing to go wrong. There's nothing to go wrong, you know. And this is also checkered with a wrap around at the grip and a wrap around at the fore-end checkering pattern. And this particular piece of outstanding fiddleback maple came from Lewiston, Idaho. It's got some unusual pattern in it. It's got some unusual colors in it. The colors come from the minerals in the soil. And anyway, this particular blank was cut by a sawyer that sold rifle stock blanks, and he cut this tree 30 yards from Jack O'Connor's house. In Lewiston, Idaho. Now, I got this blank, you know, not then when I was working at Spear Bullet Company. I bought this blank from a fellow over in Oregon that came to Wyoming and had a pickup load of gun stock blanks, and I got this blank from him. And I don't think that he had any other blanks other than the history behind that. Jack O'Connor, of course, was the premier outdoor hunting writer at the time that he spent many years, you know, in that sort of field, hunted all over this country and other parts of the world. Was a close friend of Les Bowman's. Les Bowman, you know, and he were quite close. But anyway, I never had the opportunity. You know, Jack O'Connor was here in the late 60s hunting with several friends. He brought Prince Abderisa of Iran here. And Jimmy Doolittle. And Wayne Ewing. Wayne Ewing lived in California. He was a fairly wealthy from a wealthy family. He was involved in a lodge here in the valley where I lived, about 8 miles away from me. Cross Sabers. He was a partial owner in that business for years and hunted in this part of the country. But anyway, one of the best cartridges that's ever been developed is the 270 Winchester. Just simply a 30-06 case, neck down to take a 270 bullet, 277 diameter bullet, and the case is a 40 thousandths longer. The actual case itself is 40 thousandths longer than the 30-06 case. I'm not sure why this was done, but that's the way it was done. And I believe perhaps the reason being that it had something to do with, you know, Winchester's idea of cartridge dimensions and one thing another. I built a lot of rifles in 270 Winchester over the years. The fact of the matter is, every time we turn around, we've got a new sort of cartridge that's come onto the market. And they really haven't ever, at least wise on an 06 type of a case, they haven't ever really improved on the actual 270 Winchester as it was. Now, writers still write about the 270 Winchester, but there's not a writer that I know of that has actually pursued that cartridge properly to get the full potential out of it. I have. You can read articles about these things. Even the recent article here by Lane Simpson about 100-year-old 270 Winchester. It still doesn't bring the 270 Winchester into the full potential that it's capable of. Now this first rifle that I built, 270 Winchester, the first rifle that I showed you, that has a 26-inch barrel on it. And I learned very, very quickly, compared to the early 270 Husqvarna that I have, that the 26-inch barrel compared to the shorter barrel that I had, even though that being a very handy rifle, really brought the full potential of the 270 Winchester out. Now I'll describe a couple of things here. 150 grain Mauser partition, loaded with 61 grains of reloader 26, gives this rifle gives 3,128 feet per second, and that load gave me a 1 standard deviation, by the way, and that load will print with this rifle around 5/8 of an inch. The rifle with 140 grain Mauser Accubon with 62.5 grains of reloader 26 will give me 3176 and a 7 standard deviation. And anyway, these velocities are considerably over anything that's ever been listed. And of course I work up my loads using a 1-inch tenth micrometer, reads in 1/10,000th of an inch, and I don't load anything over a 0.5 thousandth of head expansion measured with this micrometer. Now the 24-inch barreled rifle, that rifle with 63 grains of reloader 26 with 140 grain Mauser Accubon gives me 3171 and a 9 standard deviation. The rifle loaded with 65 grains of reloader 26 with 110 grain Mauser Accubon does 3409. Now I have another 270 Winchester with a 22-inch barrel. It's a Winchester Featherweight Model 70. Those came with 22-inch barrels. Now this rifle, I load it with a 140 grain Sierra Game King. This is a Sierra bullet with a plastic tip that's got a very thick jacket. That rifle loaded with 62 grains of reloader 26 with that 140 grain bullet gives me 3217. Now you can't hardly get any information out of anything that shows these bullets, any of these weight of bullets going anything hardly at all over 3,000 feet a second. Now I'm going to point out a thing or two here. 140 grain Mauser Accubon with a ballistics coefficient of 496 started out at 3,176 feet a second, gives you 1,590 foot-pounds energy at 500 yards. 150 grain Mauser partition out of the 26-inch barrel rifle has a ballistics coefficient of 465, 1,550 foot-pounds energy at 500 yards. Now the 130 grain Sierra Game King with a ballistics coefficient of 435, 1,470 foot-pounds energy at 500 yards. Now this is nothing to sneer at. This is factual ammunition as tested in my rifles. And the fact of the matter is, almost anybody with a properly loaded 270, with any barrel weight, with any barrel length that you might happen to have, 22, 24, 26-inch barrel, will give these kind of velocities, properly loaded and properly throated. And all my rifles, by the way, I load all my cartridges to an overall loaded round length of 3.370. This gives just a little slight edge in the velocity department. I load everything with a Remington 9.5 primer. I discovered early on that Remington 9.5 primer invariably performs the best. As a rule, I've loaded Winchester cases when I first started doing this. We had Winchester Super X cases. Those were very tough, very strong cases. I still have some of those cases I load for that particular rifle. I've loaded Remington cases. I get also very good velocity. Those are very tough cases. Now, Les Bowman was a lover of the 270 Winchester. In fact, he did most of his hunting in this part of the country and other areas that he might have hunted with a 270 Winchester. And most of it was done with a Model 70 Featherweight. Before we ever had some of these more premium type of bullets that we have today, you know, using Sierra bullets or early Mauser partition bullets. Now, Les had a Colt Sharps rifle that was presented to him after he left Colt in the East on the Sharps Arms project, Colt Sharps project. They presented him a very deluxe rifle with a 30-inch barrel and 270 Winchester. Now, Les and I loaded this rifle with 130 grain Mauser partitions to 3450 with a 30-inch barrel. Les decided to load it down a little, loaded it down to 100 feet a second less to 3350. And Les took this rifle to British Columbia and killed a mountain goat with that rifle at about 300 and some odd yards. Les only had 3 cartridges with him. The outfitter questioned him about the number of cartridges that he had. Les says, I don't need anything more than 3 cartridges. You know, when he left on this hunt, he fired 1 cartridge and killed a goat with that rifle. And I shot the rifle. It was a rifle that was a little heavier than I like because of the design of everything, the length of the barrel and so forth. But this gives you an idea of potential. And as I say, we've always got these various things coming out in the way of cartridges, but we're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel. And the purpose of this is not only because this cartridge now is 100 years old. The rifle was first built in a Winchester Model 54 in 1925. Later, when they came out with the Model 70 Winchester, that replaced the 54. This is what really brought it to light. Jack O'Connor hunted all over the world with a 270 Winchester. He killed all of his sheep in North America here with a 270 Winchester with 130 grain bullets, Sierras or 130 partitions. To be real honest, he never said much about it, but I learned through Les that he actually preferred a 150 Mauser partition for serious work. He didn't always use them, but he found that that was an advantage, and I found that it was an advantage. And that early Husqvarna rifle would only do 2850 with that short barrel. It didn't give me high velocity, but it was a 5/8 a minute of angle rifle. And I realized very early on, shooting game with that rifle, that it killed just as well as almost anything that I'd ever used, including a 300 H&H or a 300 Weatherby, within reasonable distance. And I have given these figures, these energy figures, out to 500 yards, because I think that's kind of where things kind of stop. You could shoot deer past there if your rifle and yourself was capable of it and you had good bullets. And I have actually killed elk out to 450 yards with 150 grain Mauser partitions out of a 270 Winchester. And the other 270, as far as I'm concerned, is the 270 Weatherby. It's also a very outstanding cartridge. It's been around here for about 75 years, and I have a 270 Weatherby that I built for myself a number of years ago. I like it very well, but especially if you're a little recoil conscious, this is kind of the upper limit of most anybody's tolerance level in the recoil department, the 270 Winchester. Properly stocked and a decent weight rifle that you can carry all day, something around, 8 pounds, maybe 8.5 pounds or something like that. And you'll never be disappointed if you do your part. And I believe that there's probably just literally millions of 270 Winchester rifles out here. I believe that if you really did a survey on it, it would amaze you at how many people have for years and still continue, just like myself, to use a 270 Winchester. Yes, I have other things. I have things considerably, heavier than that, caliber-wise. It'll take game about as far as you can decently shoot it. But anybody that's just starting out hunting, a woman, maybe a son or a daughter or something like that, there are quite a number of decent choices in a factory, fairly lightweight rifle in 270 Winchester. You won't ever go wrong with a 270. And ammunition wise, if you're just a fellow that buys factory ammunition, 270 Winchester is on almost everybody's shelf anywhere that they sell ammunition and guns. So there's a lot of things that aren't available, especially some of these latest developments. You can't find it hardly anywhere. And this is the other side of things. They come out with these things, but they don't provide you the ammunition to be able to use in it. In a lot of instances, it's very tough. But anyway, the cartridge shoots very flat and retains the energy that you need to shoot anything here, really in North America, in somebody's good hands. Les Bowman killed numerous grizzlies with a 270 Winchester. I'm not advocating it as a grizzly rifle, but in the hands of somebody that knows what he's doing, and in a situation where you don't have to shoot a bear in a quick self-defense type of a mode, the 270 Winchester is very adequate to kill a grizzly.